What's up, guys? Welcome back. Amazing RC. It's your boy Brian, and today we're talking C34. Super excited to finally get my hands on that kit. Now, when we left you in the last video, we were talking about buying a few parts. We were going to start working on, the carbon fiber chassis and basically round out our electronics, get everything in order, get everything running. And I gave you a list of parts of basically everything that we were going to purchase, what we were going to end up with when everything was completely done. Well, then the motor arrived, and the motor and transmission, I just immediately told everybody, if you're going to follow along with this build, this is the motor and transmission you're going to want. When I originally used this motor and transmission, I used it in a C14. I also used it in an Eachines EAT01 six-wheel drive truck, and both motors were exactly the same. They worked exactly the same, and they were really great. The first time I bought one of these, it was like $40. The second time I bought one of these, it was like $28. This time I purchased this motor and transmission, I got it for $21. Well, the tale doesn't end there. I also found out that you can now get this motor and transmission exactly the same as this one here for $17 and change. Now, there are many things to go over before I send you out to purchase one of these, and we're going to go over all of that in this very video. I'm going to go over the positives for this motor and transmission because I still think it's a good motor and transmission, but a few things have changed in this since the last time I put one in a C14. And then we're going to go over the negatives of this motor and transmission because there are a couple. And then whether or not I still think it's exactly what we want to do for this build. So we'll start with the positives, of course. The quality of this motor and transmission are still really good, and at $17 and change, they're really good. When you start off in the kit, you get this, I don't even know what size this is, but you get this little tiny motor and this, little transmission. It's the same layout as this motor and transmission that we got, except for the extra drive shaft. But this is what you get, and then of course it goes in this little housing here, and then it would sit in between your chassis rails, okay? And it would build right in there kind of just like that. Well, what this one does is it goes all together and goes in the same spot. Now, I say goes all together because when I first bought this motor and transmission a while back, it came as the motor and transmission. Now, when I purchased it this time, I was assuming it was going to be the exact same thing because this is what I saw when I bought this motor and transmission. Now, that's not what I got. I got this, actually, which is what you would get for the $17 and change. Now, you'll notice that the hardware is different between the two pictures that I'm showing you. Now, this motor and transmission came to me as a kit. It was in pieces, and not only was it in pieces, it was in a ton of pieces. Like, there was a lot of screws and a lot of washers. And so I'm assuming that I paid for the $21 motor and transmission that I'm assuming was going to be in one working piece when I got it. And I got the $17 and change model, which is in kit form. With that said, the build quality is still really good once I figured out how to put it together and all of the parts. And of course, another good positive attribute is the motor. Like I said, you're getting this tiny little motor stock, which I'm sure runs the truck. We're not going to try it, but I'm sure it pushes the truck around. And then you get the 370 motor, and then of course, the all-metal transmission. Real good quality, heavy metal feel to it. Another thing that's a good positive is the drive shafts themselves. And this is an upgrade from the last motor transmission that I bought in this form. I remember swapping out the drive shafts from the ones that you got with this motor and transmission to another set that actually have these little flat spots on the ends. And what the flat spots are for the grub screws to sit nice and flat right on the drive shaft and lock down. So there's no way, no matter how tight you put that grub screw in that it won't just spin on, out from under its pressure. And I really find that to be a good high quality in a motor or, drive shafts that you get that are this size. It's a good quality, and this one comes with those drive shafts, which is a pleasant surprise. And not only are the flat spots out here, but they're also in every single spot on the inside where the drive shaft is that the center gears connect to. Those also have flat spots to where not only does it lock down the grub screw really good, but it also tells you exactly where the gear's going. Now, with all of the larger, bigger metal parts, you do get quite a bit more torque. Now, like I said, I'm not going to run this motor and transmission, but I did run one of these before when we had our C14. I upgraded to this motor from the stock motor, so I do remember what this does. And there's obviously no comparison between the two. The one other thing that is, I guess it's kind of a good thing, but it's also kind of a bad thing. But you did get quite a bit of extras. You have extra washers because there are washers that go in between the bearings. There's extra black screws that basically put, both ends of the transmission together and locks the entire thing down. It gives you extras of all that. But then it also gives you like 5 or 6 extra screws that don't go anywhere on this at all. Because keep in mind, I bought, again, the $21 motor and transmission and got the $17 motor and transmission and that layout with those screws. So you did get some extras. Now, that segues perfectly into the negatives of this motor and transmission, because there are a couple that are just, to me, completely astounding. So you get all these extra screws, all kinds of good stuff, but they somehow fatally forgot to give you the screws that put the motor to the transmission housing. And you need at least like 4 millimeter long, 3 millimeter, hex head, whatever, but you need some screws to put the motor on. Any one of these extra screws that you get, none of them actually put the motor to the transmission. So when you purchase this, whether it's the $17 one or the $21 one, or God forbid you find a $35 one, you need to make sure that you have an extra set of screws laying around. Anything that would normally put a motor to your transmission to one of your RC10 cars is pretty much going to be perfect to work with this motor and transmission. So if you have some extra screws hanging around, you're going to need those before you buy this motor. Aside from that, there are no instructions. So you get all these extra parts, a big old pile of washers, four different types of screws, and all this extra stuff, and there's no instructions. Now, I know you're probably at home sitting thinking, well, you didn't need the instructions. Look, you got it. This took me a few minutes, and I'm a pretty smart cookie, and I still couldn't figure it out. It took me a few minutes. It was, do the bearings go on the outside of the drive shafts? Do they go on the inside and the outside of the bearings? Do the bearings go directly against the gears? There was just quite a bit going on before I actually got this into one piece. Then I had to pull it back apart and then grease all of the gears. And that's another thing, is you're not getting any, gear grease. Can you run it without grease? Sure you can. I wouldn't run it in the water because it's going to get all nasty and rusted and gross. So if you've got some good gear grease, make sure you install that as well. That leads right into one of the other issues that I see with this. This is not the exact same layout as it was when I purchased one that looks exactly like this. When you look at the side of this motor and transmission, right here where the transmission actually connects itself to the chassis rail, basically the old one had 2 separate screws on each side that would go through 2 separate holes, and it would kind of bolt itself all together. Well, this time they've covered one of the screws and instead replaced it with just a knob, like a metal knob. So now one of those knobs will go into one of the holes, and then you're going to put just one screw in through a hole. So I guess the knob is to keep it from, being able to adjust itself up or down. Instead of having 4 screws to put this motor and transmission to the chassis, now you only have 2. And I know it'll probably be fine, but why would you do that? You gave me 19 extra screws. You couldn't give me those 2 there? And that's not the end of that issue. Not only do I get my little knob here to go inside the chassis, but the knob doesn't fit in the chassis. They decided to powder coat these, thank you, because it's very nice. The finish is really good, until you have a knob. When the knob needs to go in a hole that it used to be able to, once you powder coat things, knob doesn't go in anymore. So now there's fitment issues. And that's not really good, because I'm very excited to get this deep down inside the chassis and continue on with the build, but now I have to try to figure out how much of this powder coating to take off to get my engine and transmission to fit. Now, aside from all the bad news about this motor and transmission, is it still good for the truck? This C34, is it going to find its way into this build? Well, sure it is. It's still a really good motor and transmission. I will get it to fit into my carbon fiber, not powder coated chassis that I'm going to build next. So I still think with the overall build quality as good as it is and the ridiculously low price of $17 and change, you're going to have to put it together. You're going to have a couple, bell head screws laying around and a little bit of gear grease. Other than that, you're good to go. So now that we have our motor, transmission, the stock steering servo here, we know we're going to throw it on our Radiolink RC6GS and our little ESC that we got from Banggood.com. I think I paid like $9 or $10 for the ESC. Got a little 2-cell LiPo battery. Now, remember, we're doing an aftermarket steering servo once we pick one up from Banggood. Right now, we've got the metal upgrade kit coming, which gives us all of our internal bearings and stuff for our wheels and this such in this build. We've got metal steering links and quite a few other pieces as well. So once we get that set of parts, we're going to really get going and putting this thing together. Next up, I'm going to take these 2 chassis rails. We're going to carve these things out of this exactly thickness carbon fiber, and we're going to go from there. So until next time, guys, this is Brian, and this will eventually be an amazing RC.